Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse, but actually enjoy it. And today's video is going to be the next big video in my Bible Code video series. This is also going to be another unscripted video. I don't really know where I'm going with this, but I do know the basic objectives that I want to achieve before the day is over with. Hopefully you have already viewed the videos that I've posted about how our solar system functions, because that's going to play into a whole lot of what we find in prophetic books like Revelation. And today we're going to be talking about just a couple of the characters that are found in Revelation, but you're really going to have to understand the basics of how our solar system works, because that's going to be a big part of what you're going to learn today. Now, our planet, well, we'll do our whole solar system. This is our sun. Let's pretend that's our sun. And then there's like Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, if that's right, I think that's right. Neptune, or Uranus and Neptune. And they're all in a row. And this row is called the ecliptic. And that's where all of our, or most of our constellations that people know of are located, because the constellations are just patterns formed in the stars, and they're all around our planet. So they're everywhere. But in general, those that look for signs and omens, those who practice the religion of astrology, are not concerned with any of these constellations. They're only concerned with the ones that are in this row, this line, where the planets are. And sometimes, they're not all in a row like that. In fact, that never happens. Planets are all actually on any side of the ecliptic. And in fact, if we look at our solar system from above, and I know this is basics, but there are people that are going to come here that haven't watched my other videos, and I don't want them to be lost. Here's the sun, and say here's the Earth, and maybe Mercury's over here, and Venus is here, Mars is here. And these are circling around like this. It's just the orbits of the planets are going around the sun, and that like a plate. They don't do like an atom. If we see an image of an atom, looks like that, because supposedly whatever atoms are, they have particles that are orbiting them all the way around, not just in a row. But that's not the way the solar system works. Supposedly, and basically everything we're told about our solar system can be tested out just using your own eyes. If they tell you that a certain thing is Mars and you can find it in the southeast or whatever, if you go out and look, you'll see a planet. And if you look at it long enough, you can see it's a little pinkish or reddish, means it's different than the others. But anyways, the constellations that astrology concerns themselves with is out here. We don't concern ourselves with any of the others, because, if we're looking into the nighttime sky, and we see like Gemini or Libra or Taurus or any of the constellations that are found in the ecliptic. So like this is Gemini, and I'm not really sure of exactly how it works, but that's like their heads, the two twin stars of Gemini, and then you have like something like this, and the way they draw it out is like, I don't know. So that's what Gemini looks like. Well, if you look up into the sky at Gemini, and you see, and you won't even see that, because the planets are not going to look too much brighter than the stars, but they will be a little bit brighter. But you see Mars, like right here. Then what you'll see, like in the astrology section of the newspaper, would be something like, tonight Mars is in Gemini, so it's a good day to plant your garden, or something like that. And so that's what they mean. They mean that, all of the planets exist in this line that goes around our solar system's ecliptic, and when those planets are visible, depending on where they're visible, is somehow related to your future. Okay, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that. Now, a lot of what I'm going to tell you is going to sound like astrology, but it isn't. In the Bible, there are quite a few references to astrology as it existed back in the Roman Empire, and in fact, as it had existed all the way from the Egyptian Empire. And so, somebody might ask, well, is the Bible a book about worshiping the gods of astrology? No, because the references to the gods of astrology are always derogatory. And so in the book of Revelation, we have that system. We have constellation Draco. And I know that's not right. I don't even know how many stars are in Draco. I know that they say that there are 7 stars within 10 parsecs, and the constellation itself is made up of the brightest stars, which I don't even remember how many there are. It might be like 14. It's really big. Draco goes way across the sky. Well, Draco is a Greek word from which we get our English word, dragon. So in the Bible, when it says, down the great dragon was hurled, what it actually says is Draco. Actually, that's not totally accurate. The word in our Bible is translated from the Greek word dracoon, which comes from the Latin word Draco, because most of the stuff that's in our sky is based on Latin. And in fact, when you, like, what is it, I think... Yeah, I think it's just basically that. Now, in our Bibles it says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Well, that's actually Greek, so that's a little different than, our constellations. And yet, to this day, we still use the same system that existed back in the ancient past to identify our stars, because if we're looking at a constellation, each of these stars has its own name. So this is constellation Draco, and I don't know how they do it when they're naming the stars, but it'd be like this. The brightest star is this one right here, and that's Draco Alpha, I think. And they follow a pattern where it's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and the A is the brightest star, and the Z would be the least brightest. But when they run out, see, with the invention of the telescope, people started to find different stars up there that they didn't know about in the ancient past. So eventually, you have too many stars, and you run out of alphabet. And so even though the brightest stars are all based on the Greek alphabet, after that, they go into the Latin alphabet, which is where we get the word Draco. So in the Bible, we're told, down the great dragon was hurled. Basically, down the great Draco was hurled. The connection's very easy to make. Oh, and by the way, in the Bible, one of the very first verses is, one of the earliest verses in the book of Revelation is, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And then it immediately goes into describing a whole bunch of celestial phenomenon. When God is saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega, He's showing the foolishness of worshiping different stars, because He's all of the stars. That's what that means. Anybody that thinks this means that God is Jesus is really stretching it. This is not stretching anything. When God says, I'm the Alpha and Omega, astronomers all over the world automatically start thinking about the system of naming stars, and they would obviously understand that saying He was the Alpha and Omega means He's all of the stars. But anyways, there's Draco. What's interesting about this is that in mythology, Draco is like a good guy. He's the lawgiver. He's the one that brought civilization to mankind. He's the one that taught humans how to engage in, civilization. In the Bible, it says, down the great Draco was hurled, the original serpent, the one called Satan and Devil. Satan the Devil. So that's Draco. Now, According to ancient mythology, Draco was put into the skies to memorialize his importance, and he was put directly over the center of the earth. Now, also in Greek mythology, is Draco held a beautiful virginal woman prisoner, and her name was Andromeda. And she is represented in the sky. Oh, I don't even know. It looks like a V, I guess. But, by the time they add a few things to it, it's kind of looks like a woman falling through the sky. And she actually has chains. She's depicted with chains on her arms and chains on her legs. And that's because of the story. She was being held prisoner by Draco. And I think she was chained. She was chained up. Well, the story changes quite a bit. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. She was chained up at the edge of the sea so that the great sea dragon would come and eat her. But she was saved by, I can't think of his name right now, Perseus, god Perseus. And Perseus is in the stars. Perseus constellation's over here somewhere, and I think he's got a sword in one hand, or a club, or a bow and arrow or something, and he's coming to rescue her. And then, of course, Draco's over here. But I'll read you something about Andromeda, just so that you know. She's given all these, wonderful attributes in mythology. But it says here, and look, after we read, here's where she appears. Whoops. Is a woman falling through the sky with chains on her arms and legs. And over here on this side of the book is all the wonderful things about Andromeda. And you get over here and it says, behind the frame of Greek myth, there is a darker and more puzzling root to this constellation. We see a hint of this in Andromeda's name, which means ruler of men. As the Latin poet Manilius, 1st century CE, remarks, the vanquisher of Medusa was vanquished at the sight of Andromeda. So perhaps she is not such a passive and innocent figure, but is closer to the goddess Aphrodite as a representative of female desire. This is borne out by the Mesopotamian roots of the Andromeda legend in early times. This constellation was dedicated to the ancient Egyptian goddess of love and war, Astarte, known as Ishtar, to the Babylonians. Astarte, iconographically shown as a sexual voracious sea goddess, was worshipped in various temples along the ancient shores of Palestine, the very shores of Andromeda's attempted sacrifice. Now, for you that are not aware of it, Palestine is currently the area we currently call Israel, because 1948, I think the British and American Empire went in and forced the inhabitants of that area into relocation centers and imported people from around the world to fill their homes and take over their country. And that area of the earth, and we'll say it's right about here, just because on a map it's about that area. But anyways, that's Palestine. That's the location where Andromeda was originally worshipped. Now, interestingly enough, this is actually the center of a much larger area. In about 2,700 years ago, Nebuzaradan, the general Nebuzaradan, under the direction of Nebuchadnezzar, the king, went in from Babylon, about there, and conquered Israel. And they went into the temple and they carried everything off. And the first thing they went after was the Ark of the Covenant. But, surprisingly, when they went in there, it was gone. Now, this is not recorded in the Bible. I mean, it is recorded in the Bible that he went over there to get that. But there's nothing in there about him bringing it back. But there is something in there about Nebuzaradan bringing back pallets of gold, or piles of gold, and they were stacked in piles of 666, because Solomon had been stockpiling that gold in the temple at 606 talents per year. That's specifically in the Bible. Well, after this, suddenly, Babylon becomes this, because Nebuchadnezzar was the first king to successfully enter the Promised Land and take it over, because the Jewish people had been abandoned by God. So anyways, this is going to be important that we understand that that right there is Jerusalem. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But we're going to talk a little bit more about astronomy and how our solar system works, how our Earth works. Because this is going to be key to understanding why the Bible specifically talks about these characters. Now, these characters in the skies above us are all of the ancient gods and goddesses of the past. And they're not just the gods and goddesses of the Latin Empire, the Roman Empire, but the gods and goddesses of the Greek Empire, the gods and goddesses, as we just said, of the Phoenician Empire, Canaan, Palestine, that's all Phoenicia. And of course, Assyria before that, Babylon, Egypt, all of these gods and goddesses are basically the same gods and goddesses. We just read where Andromeda was actually Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth is mentioned throughout the Bible, but depending on what cultures the Israelites were dealing with at the time, she's also called by other names. In the very beginning of time, she's called Isis. She eventually, in the Greek portion of the Bible, is called Astarte, as well as Diana. And all of those goddesses that were just mentioned in that little article are mentioned in the Bible. So it's very important that we understand that this is the constellations are filled with false gods. And what we're going to talk about right now is celestial navigation. See, all of these stories about the gods and goddesses getting put into our constellations was important, not because religion was important. It was just as important back then as it is today, but mostly because of celestial navigation. And I guess we need to start off, well, here we go. We're just going to talk about celestial navigation as it exists. At one time, the whole earth was a paradise, and there was a sea above the earth that was frozen. And I made a video series about that called Written in Stone, which is about all the cultures on earth having these stories about this sea of glass or sea of ice surrounding our planet back in the ancient days. And it says in there that all of the oceans were in one place. But after the sea of glass fell to the earth, which that's what the Bible says, that in ancient days that the sky window was shattered as if it had been struck, and all the waters from heaven fell to the earth. That was that sky window falling to the earth. And when that happened, suddenly we didn't have one ocean in the middle of the earth. We had a whole ocean of a earth, and then continents spread out by vast amounts of water. So this would be land. All of the rest is sea. Of course, there's more in there, and it obviously doesn't look like that. But once that happened, people felt the need to go exploring over the seas. Now, we'll go ahead and do this part again that I did in my other video. If you're out here on the sea and you come from this little island right here, once you sail out a certain distance, the curvature of the earth starts to conceal your island. And once you get out so far, water looks the same in all directions. If you can't see your land, you have no landmarks. So there came a time when people started to build lighthouses, and they started to put little areas where people could sit on top of the mast, and that allowed them to be able to see over the curvature of the earth, which allowed them to be able to sail further out. But you're still limited because the curve of the earth does not stop at a certain point. It just keeps curving, and then suddenly you're once again without landmarks. So what they figured out was that when they got too far out, they could look to see if the star associated with that island was visible, and all they had to do was sail to that star. But it was a little bit complicated, so they had to come up with a system for knowing which stars were over which areas of the earth and when they could be depended on to be there. So they came up with this system that we're going to talk about right now. That looks better than the last one I did. I like them when they're round, because sometimes if you shape them like something else, people don't know what you're talking about. But here we go. So back in the ancient past, men realized that the best way to get around and not get lost was to follow the stars. So the religion of ancient Egypt, which is the same as our science today, was called sacred geometry. You know, sacred geometry eventually became alchemy, eventually became science, and then there's every different branch of alchemy and sacred geometry and science to make it seem like they're not related, when in fact it's just the same exact thing, different culture, different language. So they thought, well, since the earth has 360 days, let's divide the earth into 360 lines of latitude. And that makes perfect sense, because they had a plan, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So if you live here on this line of latitude and you get lost at sea, you could aim for this star, which is directly over your line of latitude. But it's not going to be over your house. It's only going to be over your house once a day, about. Not for like once every 24 hours, but close, because you have what's called the sidereal year, which is the time it takes for the earth to spin. But you also have the solar, not sidereal year, sidereal day, sidereal time, year, month, it doesn't matter, which is not the same as your solar, because solar is based on how many times you see the sun go past. And see, since the earth is circumnavigating the sun while it's spinning, the amount of time it takes for a day is not the same as the amount of time it takes for the earth to spin on its axis. But anyways, here's the thing. If you know that this star is over your line of latitude, if you follow that star, it can eventually get you home. But people needed something a little bit more solid, and so they divided up the earth into 360 lines this way as well. And those are called longitude, but these are not locations, they're not understars. These are ways of dividing the earth up according to time. You see, back in the ancient past, they knew we had a 360-day year, so obviously the good thing to do would be to put 360 lines. And so they did that in both directions, 360 this way, 360 that way, and in fact, anytime you do math that involves circles, you use 360 degrees to describe a full circle. Now, the reason that it was divided this way the way it is, and this way the way it is, and we ended up with our clocks divided up the way they are, is because if we put 60 seconds as the time that it takes for a minute, and by the way, these lines are divided up into seconds as well. 360 lines divisible by 60, very easy. And obviously, if it's divisible by 60, then 60 minutes would be a good choice of how to divide up time as well. And then over the course of a day, you have hours, so you make your hours 24, so 24 hours in a day. And once again, 24 or 360 is divisible by 24. That's why those lines are there. You know, I've done videos in the past where I talk about the fact that every culture earthwide at one time believed that they had a 360-day calendar. This was not a ritualistic religious calendar. This was their actual calendar that they used to determine when to plant their crops, when to harvest their crops. If that 360-day calendar in the ancient past was a religious calendar, there would have been crop failures earthwide. But we know for a fact that these people believed they had a 360-day calendar for thousands of years. It wasn't until about 2,700 years ago that God's prophets all said God is changing times and seasons, which would more accurately be translated as God is changing months and years. Then suddenly the whole earth didn't know how long the calendar was, because you would have calendars from one culture that said the earth was 370 days, and others were saying the Earth had a 350-day year. And so, obviously, for about 400 years, people could not get it right and could not figure out how to get it right. But somebody somewhere figured out that if in the ancient past you could divide the Earth up in a way that would work, then they could figure out a way to do that too. And that's how we came up with our current calendar. Okay, so anyways, if you know that your house is right here, and all you have to do is get there at midnight, you still need to know what midnight is at your house, not where you are. So if you're out here, other side of the Earth, it might be noon. You know, so you don't want to know what time it is where you are. You want to know what time it is at your house. And so over the course of time, a system was developed. It was a very easy system back then because remember, when we had our 300, and this is about a 360-day year. We're working with this 360-day grid. I'm not talking about our modern day. I'm talking about this is how this whole system was set up. So back in that day, the moon would have always been in the nighttime sky. The sun would always be in the daytime sky. You could look at the moon, and just by looking at the moon, you could tell what time it is where you were. But at the same time, you had to have other markers to tell you what time it was where you needed to go, and they had that as well. We'll get into that in another video. But for right now, just know that that's where we got this system of navigation. And that's going to be very important to understanding why these people all knew what Andromeda was. You know, it wasn't like just a simple ritualistic thing that if you wanted to get good luck, you went out underneath Andromeda, looked at her and prayed to her, or went under Draco and prayed to her, or whatever. But something that you need to know, a lot of ancient records from, you know, I guess thousands of years ago, 3,000 years ago, speak about constellation Draco in a very special way. We're told right dead center of constellation Draco was what they call the North Star. The North Star is the star that never spins, because remember, our Earth is spinning. Which means that all the stars are always going around. So if we're in the middle of America and we're looking straight up, we go out an hour later, we'll notice that the entire sky has shifted over. And it will shift over according to that grid system, 360 degrees or whatever. And this star never moves because being directly over the axis of the Earth, that star cannot go anywhere. It spins around, but you know, a star looks pretty much the same all the way around. We wouldn't notice that it was spinning around. But that was Draco, and it was a star right in the middle of Draco was the North Star. And you know, part of why we know this is ancient records from the past indicate that the pyramids would allow you to see Draco, that star, the North Star, Draco, from all the way down in the basement. So if you're in the pyramid, there was some kind of deal, passageways or whatever that did this. If you're over here, then all night long, from this spot, you could see Draco. I mean, that's just that's the record. That's the ancient record that exists. And so we know that that's true. It can't not be true, because if they could only look at Draco for a couple of seconds or a minute or so, then that would indicate that Draco was not indeed the North Star, but was just one of the other stars, always moving. But they said in their books, their ancient texts, that Draco's middle star was the North Star. They could see it all night long. It never moved from its location. And so you just have to believe that that's the truth. And scientists know that. Scientists believe that because there's too many. They left too many clues. There's too much of a paper trail to deny it. There's just one problem with that. Draco is currently not our North Star. Right now, the North Star is called Polaris. It's part of the Little Bear constellation. And I don't know, little Bear, this is the star right here, right? When you look up there, what you'll see is a Little Dipper. All right, Little Dipper is an asterism. It's not a constellation. A constellation is the bear, and the bear looks something like this. Not really, but you know, just so you know that the star is in the nose of the bear. So scientists have come up with this theory called progression of the equinoxes, that our Earth's axis is tilting ever so gently, and every gazillion years or so it moves a millimeter or something like that, which means that over time the North Star will always change. Same thing's true with the Southern Star. The star down there is, I look it up all the time, and I say I'll never forget it, and I'll forget it the next day. Octantis, I think it is Octantis. Maybe not. I mean, this might be Octantis. Octantis may be the star, and just know that these stars have names, and all of these names are Greek alphabets, Latin alphabets. So here's the problem with scientific explanation for the movement of this star, is that if you even look at the scientific explanation for it, then these Egyptians had to be looking at that thing 1 million years ago before humans supposedly evolved. And I'm sure there's somebody out there watching this that'll say, oh, you're a liar, you're misleading people. They understand that it was only 16,000 years ago or something like that. But the reality is, in our lifetimes, from the moment you were born to the moment I was born, from that time to today, Polaris has been our North Star. There is absolutely nothing to indicate that in our lifetimes that this has always been the North Star. So it hasn't moved in 70 years, 50 years. But we actually have some of the earliest star charts that were accurately produced on a printing press, 500 years old, 400 years old, whenever that happened. And we know that Polaris was the North Star for that entire time, because sailors have been going to sea with star charts based on Polaris being the North Star. Now, we can confirm it's our North Star now. You go outside, set up a camera, set it facing north, turn it on time-lapse, and you'll get a big swirling pattern over the course of the night that just looks like a bullseye. And the reason for that is, over the course of the night, all of these stars are spinning around, but Polaris is not. So it's an easy enough thing for just the average person to do. They were doing this with old black and white Brownie cameras back, 100 years ago. Old ships are found with star charts carved into the wooden planks. And in every single instance, they look like this. Polaris is the North Star. So we're talking about, we have 2,000 years of archaeological evidence from cultures all around the world indicating that Polaris was the North Star. But all records older than 2,000 years indicate that Draco was the North Star. So interestingly enough, let me remind you of a story about Draco, or about the serpent, the dragon, from the days of Moses, when the Israelites were passing into the Promised Land, or trying to travel to the Promised Land. They sinned, and they sinned mightily, greatly against the God, Yahweh. And so they started to be infested with snakes. And the snakes were biting them, and the Israelites were dying. And so Moses prayed to God. He said, well, this is what you do if you want to cure them snake bites. Go out there and make you a stick, a metal stick, and attach a metal serpent to it. And stick that in the ground, and anybody that gets bit by a snake, you tell them to come look at that thing. Do an act of worship to that stick, and they'll be cured. And it happened. Okay, so what is it? Why was it so important to do this to these Israelites? Well, they were worshiping false gods. And what god were they worshiping? And what is the stick? Well, the stick is our Earth's axis. You know, the Bible doesn't say that what Moses put in the ground looked like that. What he put in the ground probably looked like this. Snake on a stick. Now, in our culture, medicine, modern medicine in America, steak on a stick, steak on a snake. Snake on a stick looks like this. Something like that. You got two snakes on one stick. Dollar bill. One snake on two sticks. And if you look it up, if you go to Wikipedia or Google, whatever, these are supposed to represent the Pillars of Hercules. Well, those Pillars of Hercules actually were what the two columns in front of Solomon's temple represented as well. So you've always got, they're just all around the world for who knows what reason, not just in American culture, but in all cultures, you've got a snake on a stick, you got a snake on two sticks, or two snakes on one stick, and this is almost universal. Why there's two on this one and one on that one, I don't know. And by the way, the two sticks in the dollar bill, that's what the Twin Towers represented, New York. Bad people with no electricity or indoor plumbing blew that up, in case you didn't hear. Oh, and the way they did it was they stole some 21st century airplanes and flew them into them buildings. All right, so we've covered that. Now, we got to figure out why all of this is important. If at one time the axis of the Earth went through constellation Draco, how did the axis of the Earth end up in Polaris? And the number should tell you, like I said, every star chart back 2,000 years is identical to our modern star charts. Polaris is the North Star. And this star is not really that close to that star. Well, on the day that Jesus died, there was an earthquake. I'm not making this up, it's in the Bible. 3 days later, there was another earthquake. His tomb opened up, or the tombs of all the dead opened up. And somewhere in there, every star chart on Earth was suddenly unusable. And you couldn't see Draco from the bottom of the pyramid anymore. I do believe that one of those earthquakes was recorded in the Bible to tell us why Draco is no longer on top of the stick. Because in the book of Revelation, it gives us a series of events, and it gives them to us in some amount of chronological order about things that are going to happen during a 1,260-day cycle. Now, we know that this is not figurative. It's a real time cycle, 1,260 days. Because it also calls it, in other books of the Bible as well, not just Revelation, this number 1260 pops up several places. 42 months pops up several places talking about similar events, and 42 months comes out to 1,260 days. But it also calls it 3 1/2 years. Now, if you do the math, this doesn't add up. Because 3 1/2 years is not 1,260 days according to a 365-day year. But if you imagine that the book of Revelation is about restoring our solar system and its calendar, then suddenly 3 1/2 years, 42 months, and 1,260 days are all the exact same time period. They all equal one another. And the reason that's important for right now is after reading the book of Revelation many times, it seems to me that the events involving Draco are separate from that time period. And in fact, it says Draco was cast down because our Lord was able to free us from bondage. And so Draco was cast down. Down the great dragon was hurled. So, if you're looking at that, it sounds like God saying that he took the entire universe and twisted it. I don't think that's what happened at all. I think probably what happened is the Earth's axis shifted. And I don't know what it is, like 25 degrees, 30 degrees difference. That is a big amount. It's not, it doesn't look like that much here because I didn't draw it out right, but even still bazillions of miles. And I believe that scripture in the book of Revelation about down the great dragon was hurled is a direct reference to down great Draco was hurled. And remember now that we're not talking about God telling us to follow astrology, because he calls Draco Satan. And then he calls Andromeda, the wonderful, saintly, virginal princess. It calls her Ashtoreth, the harlot, and the mother of all harlots. Direct reference to the original sin between men and women involving the procreative act that brought about the mighty men of renown, the mighty men perpetually, the Nephilim, the gods, the men who rule the world even today. It's not a genetic thing. It's just the fact that evil people came about from the creation of the Nephilim, and we have evil people today. And in fact, if you want to rule the world, you cannot be a good person, because you won't even be able to run for garbage collector, much less, president. So we're going to look at this one more time. We're going to look at a few things on here. Now, I told you, currently, up here is Little Dipper. Then over here is the serpent, the Draco. Well, over here is Andromeda. Falling through the sky. Well, there's another one down here. Directly over the South Pole is a star, Sigma Octantis. Couldn't think of it earlier. Sigma Octantis. Really, really dim. No one ever... If you get a star chart, it won't be on there, because star charts only have stars that are useful for celestial navigation, which means they have to be brighter than magnitude something or other. Well, right after that is is a constellation that points to it. And that pointer constellation is called Crux. Now, Crux is really no different than any of this. In the ancient cultures, Andromeda was wonderful. In ancient cultures, Draco was wonderful, the great lawgiver, the one who taught us about civilization. Well, in the ancient past, Crux was the Ankh. 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 Supposedly, you can see this Ankh all over the place. Anytime you see something about ancient Egyptian mythology, there's always an Ankh somewhere. Usually it's in the hand of Isis. And Isis, once again, is actually the Hebrew word Aishisha. So, and Aishisha gets translated as wife in our Bible, sometimes as woman, sometimes as something else. Aishisha simply means female leader of the male tribal leader. Remember, Andromeda was supposed to be the ruler of men. Aishisha means female leader of the male tribal leader. And that makes sense because in Hebrew, male tribal leader is Aish. So Aish, male tribal leader, Aishisha, female leader of the male tribal leader, Andromeda, the leader of men. And it was Eve who led mankind to follow Satan. So that's what that's all about. Well, every picture of Aishisha, Isis, she's carrying an Ankh, and this is the real story supposedly her husband Osiris was killed. The green one, by the way, Osiris is called the green one because he was a serpent god. And he's also mentioned, the word Osiris, it means bearer of the eye of enlightenment. And in the Bible, he's spoken of specifically as Lucifer, because Lucifer, the Hebrew word Lucifer, means Osiris. It is the bearer of enlightenment. He was killed, thrown into the Nile, cut up into little pieces, and so Isis went looking for him. And she brought all his pieces back, and they were able to put them together with the exception of one piece. She could not find his penis. Somehow it had been washed away, eaten by a fish, something. And so she had to put Osiris together without his Ankh. And so you always see her carrying the Ankh because the Ankh is the key of life. It's the thing that she was able to use to impregnate herself in order to bring about her son Horus. So you had Isis, Osiris, and Horus. Horus is a half-human, half-god. He's a demigod. He is the equivalent of all the demigods of all cultures around the world. Hercules, half-human, half-god. Mother was a human, father was a god. And that's another thing about all of these ancient cultures that have stories of demigods. All stories of demigods, the father is a god, the mother is a human. So this Ankh was this down here. But since it's at the South Pole, obviously, you can't see it from ancient Egypt, right? Wrong. The ancient past, when you could go down into the basement of the pyramid and see Draco, the center of Draco, from the basement of the pyramid, well, at the same time, guess what you could see from outside just looking around? And they may have even had a way of seeing this, but I doubt it. You could see Crux. Now that's impossible, right? Because if Crux is here, and it's still there to this day, that tourists spend thousands of dollars so they can go down there and have a midnight mass or, Sunday revival or whatever underneath the sacred penis of Osiris. They don't say that, though. Now they call it this. They call it the cross. Now, that's in our English Bibles. In the English Bibles, we call this the cross. Very obviously, it's just an Ankh with the top closed up. But most Bibles today are translated from Latin. And the original Latin word is crux. And that's a made-up word because in the ancient Greek Bible, the word is staru. So it says very clearly in the Bible that Jesus was killed on a staru. In Greek, and this is all Greek, the Greek that they use for banking transactions, the Greek that they use for property titles, the Greek that's in the Bible, all Greek. Staru means pointed stick. So we're always finding these ancient documents saying, go to the corner of your property and drive a staru into the ground. It's just very, very obvious that the word crux in Latin is not the same as the word staru. Or staros. Or staros, there's a lot of different ways that they spell it. It's always the same thing. It's a pointed stick. So somewhere when the Latin church took over, they changed staru into crux. Crux ends up in our Bibles as cross. Very few Bibles actually translate that as pointed stick, although it has been done. But the name of this constellation down here is Crux. Ankh. So we're going to look at what that means according to our book of Revelation. This is the whole point of the whole thing. Hope this gets you excited about the series because I absolutely promise you this is not the end of it. I'm learning as I'm doing this stuff. It's like I get that stuff all over my fingers and I wipe my face and I get covered with that whiteboard markers. So now I keep me a little old sweat rag in here. I'm going to look at this. So there was a time when the earth was shifted this way, and Draco was at the top. Crux would have been down here somewhere, and the people in ancient Egypt would have seen both Draco and Crux in their skies, and in fact, from their pyramid, they could actually look through a long tunnel at the North Star right here. But on the day that Jesus died, there was an earthquake. The Earth's axis shifted. I shouldn't have erased him. He's good right where he was. Actually, he's not. He would be on the other side. You know, when you're talking about constellations, this is one of the things. You can draw this constellation anywhere you want around that circle. Like if you had Libra out here, you could draw Libra here, Libra here, Libra here, all the way, because the Earth is spinning, so it doesn't make any difference. But that's kind of confusing, and I know a lot of people don't want to have to think too hard, so let me figure out a good way to do this that's going to work. Yeah, because we want this to go well. That's Andromeda, right? This is Crux. Now, we already know the story. Crux is not that far off. But yeah, I guess it's about that far off, because the pointer star is down here. Crux is over there. You understand what I'm saying? You got the pointer star, which will be right here under the axis. If you follow all the teeny tiny little almost imperceptible stars in the tail of Crux, it will go here. But Crux is over here somewhere. And during the night, Crux is actually spinning round and round and round, because it's not at the south. Just its pointer star is south. So what you'll see over the course of the night, if you're in the southern hemisphere, is in the early hours of evening, Crux will be like that. And if you go out a couple hours later, Crux will be up here like this. And then right before morning, it'd be like right there. So it's all night long, it's changing position. And the same thing is true of our northern star here. See, Little Dipper is going around and around. It's going the opposite direction from our perception. But it really isn't, because the Earth is only spinning one direction. You know, so all the stars rise in the east and set in the west. The sun rises in the east, sets in the west. The moon rises in the east, sets in the west. This thing here spins from east to west. This down here spins from east to west. But if you're on the southern hemisphere looking at it, you know, whereas if we're looking this way at the Little Dipper, it's going from east to west. If we're looking this way at Crux, it's going from east to west. So from our perspective, they look like they're going in the opposite directions. The reality is it's just all going the same direction. Okay, here comes the grand finale. Don't leave to go get popcorn or anything now, because you don't want to miss this. Do I have that right? Yes, I do. Okay, this is our axis. Now, if our solar system was to go back to the way it was, for our axis to stop pointing at our North Star now and point to some other star over here, just a shift in the axis. Exactly, went like all the way up to where it was before, and then same equal distance the other way. We would still experience the same livable conditions. And there is a way that could be done. There's actually two different ways that this could all change, and I'll show you that in a second. But suddenly, what are we going to see? Like, this is Israel once again. Now, you've got Crux over here, and you got Andromeda over here. Remember what the Revelation says. It says, "O you great city, Babylon the Great." Babylon has fallen. So here's the axis. What's happened to Babylon? She's fallen. In one instance, when Jesus was asked, what will be a sign of the end of civilization, or what will be the sign of the conclusion of the system of things, what will be the sign of your return, depending on your understanding of the Bible and the translation you use, Jesus said quite a few things. And a lot of the things he said seem awful cryptic. Because, I just did the video about the 5 foolish and the 5 wise virgins. And that story, if you look at it, they say, what will be a sign of the end of the world? And he says, there's going to be 10 virgins. Well, this sounds like the question has absolutely nothing to do with the answer. And that once again, Jesus gave an answer that was nothing like his apostles wanted. How will we know you've returned? He could have said, well, what's today? Okay, in 2,000 years I'll be back. He could have told them something simple like that. But he says, whenever it is that you see the abomination that causes desolation where it does not belong, then you'll know. So, here's our equator. For thousands of years now, if you wanted to see the Ankh, crux, the cross of the satanic cults of the earth today, you would have to travel down to the equator in order to see it. Because remember, it was down here. You couldn't see it from your house. If you're in the United States and you want to see crux, you can do it. But you can't see the whole thing, but you can see most of it by simply going to southern Florida, southern Texas, or Hawaii. From the very tips of those 3 states, you can see crux. But if the earth shifts, the disgusting thing that causes destruction will suddenly be up where nearly everybody earthwide can see it. Because basically, if you're on the North Pole, you won't be able to see this far past the equator. But most people don't live there. I think most people are right about here or lower. If you live anywhere from here down, you can see this. And like I said, in the Bible, depending on what Bible you have, this could be called the abomination that causes destruction. It could be called a disgusting thing that causes desolation. But the reality is, every army that has ever engaged in Satan's genocide has walked into battle with a cross on their shield, something like that, something like that, something like that, or something like that. It's all the same thing. That is the symbol of rulership by the demons. That's what it is. It's what it's always been. Now, just to confirm what I'm saying, we're going to do a little bit more discussion about celestial navigation. That is only speculation, but I do believe it's 100% accurate. The evidence supports it. There is no evidence to not support it. So we're going to look at it right now. Remember what I said, that at one time, Israel was here, Babylon was here. Nebuzaradan went into Israel, conquered it, expanding Babylonian territory to that point right there. And immediately after that happened, there is a verse in the Bible that says that Nebuchadnezzar went out and looked over his kingdom and proclaimed, "Here I have created Babylon the Great." He was talking about this, Babylon the Great. And in the New Testament, scriptures about Babylon falling call her Babylon the Great, depending on how you translate it, the great city Babylon. So why would, if Nebuchadnezzar specifically called his empire Babylon the Great, and the Bible is specifically talking about Babylon the Great falling, why would I come out here and say that Babylon the Great is this constellation? You're thinking. Remember, I said if my house is here and I could always aim for this star and find my way home. That's how celestial navigation works. Well, if you want to find Israel or wanted to find Israel in the ancient past before Jesus died, all you had to do was, if you're in a ship, look for old Andromeda. She would have been right over Babylon the Great. Ashtoreth. Ishtar, Aishish, Astarte. Also, curiously enough, now this here is about the end of the world. This is putting an end to civilization. So when God said, "Oh, Babylon the Great has fallen," obviously he's talking about this, but what else is he talking about? The end of civilization. The end of civilization's capital. Zion. In English, Zion means burnt place. Very, very soon, our God is going to turn his attention back to his planet. And when he does, this burnt place will be gone, and the earth will be restored to its original pristine paradise conditions, along with our entire solar system. Now, just to clear this up so you understand, because there's people right now saying, if our earth spins like that, then we'll all die. We'll freeze to death or we'll burn to death. Not necessarily. Now, all of this is happening in pretty quick order, and one of the things that we're told is that the earth will have its ice shield restored. It may be absolutely necessary for our Earth's axis to tilt back to a directly upright or to a stronger angle in another direction, just so that life could be bearable underneath this ice shield that is spoken of throughout the Bible. I mean, in the book of Revelation, it's called the Sea of Glass, but if you look at it in Hebrew or in Greek, it says the hard, transparent sea. Same sea used for any sea of water. Obviously, that's a sea. And like I said earlier, when the flood came, you know, our Bibles, English Bibles, say some kind of stuff about all of the floodgates of the heavens were opened up. But if you look at it in ancient Hebrew, what it says is the sky window was shattered as if it had been struck. So, we already spoke about how our solar system has what's called an ecliptic. So here's the sun, right? It's kind of like an egg. Got all the planets going out from it this way. And the religion of astrology, which is basically every religion that has ever existed, is based on these stars at the end of the ecliptic, right? So within this, say this is our Earth's axis. Our Earth could easily just shift in place. But, what if our whole solar system shifts? Well, suddenly these are not in the ecliptic. We've got a whole new set of stars in the ecliptic. And suddenly, for us, Babylon, which is up here, is now over here somewhere. Crux, which is over here, is now over here somewhere. And suddenly, we get to see all of these shifts in our universe without altering the weather whatsoever, because our weather is dependent on the sun. It's not dependent on the ecliptic. And there are quite a few verses found in the Bible that seem to be about celestial phenomenon, because they mention all of the different constellations, and suddenly they're messed up. Like, you don't have Leo the lion, you have a constellation with the head of a lion and the feet of a leopard, or something like that. Like, all the constellations being messed up would probably be a good way of describing this event. Now, something else that's described in the book of Revelation, it's when it talks about Babylon, you great city, it says, you have become the dwelling place of every unclean spirit. There's Hercules, the first Nephilim. There's over here is Draco. Over here is Andromeda, and there's Virgo, and here's what's his name? Osiris. They call him Orion. All of the wicked spirits are the demons. All of the unclean creatures, because here's Capricorn over here, right? There's Cancer. There's all of these different animals. These snakes and scorpions and wild cats, dogs, those kind of things. All of that is in our constellations. So when it says, "O Babylon, you great city, you've become the dwelling place of every unclean bird and every unclean spirit and every wicked demon," it's talking about the constellations. It's talking specifically about religion. Now, more to the point, it's talking about our universe. Talking about the stars as perceived currently on our earth, while Satan is the god of the earth. At the end of Revelation, at the very beginning of the book of Genesis, it says, "In the beginning God looked around and he saw everything was very good." Very good. That was when he was completed. Satan had not yet entered into a covenant with Satan. Everything was very good. At the very end of Revelation, it says that at the end, after everything was accomplished, God looked around and he saw that everything was very good again. I mean, if you go back and translate from the original Hebrew to the original Greek, that's what it says. In some Bibles it says God has made all things new, but what it says really is God has made everything very good again. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.